The wind howled across the empty prairie, bending the tall grass like a bough under its invisible hand. Winter was coming early this year, and Rafe could feel it in the ache of his bones as he trudged back toward the ranch house, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened earth. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky bruised purple and gray. He pulled his coat tighter, his breath curling in the air like smoke. Another long day, another silent supper waiting for him inside, just him and Millie, his bright-eyed little shadow, who deserved so much more than he could give. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered wood groaning under the wind's insistent push. Rafe frowned. He'd latched that door himself this morning, yet now it stood slightly ajar, swaying on its hinges. His hand drifted toward the rifle slung over his shoulder, his fingers brushing the cold metal. Could be a coyote. Could be worse. He stepped inside, the scent of hay and leather filling his nose. The lantern light flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the stalls. Then he heard a faint rustling, too deliberate to be an animal. His grip tightened on the rifle. "Come out," he called, his voice rough from disuse. "Ain't gonna ask twice." A beat of silence. Then, from the farthest stall, a woman emerged, her dress worn thin, her dark hair tangled from the wind. Behind her, half hidden in the hay, a small child clutched her skirts, eyes wide with fear. The woman lifted her chin, but Rafe saw the tremor in her hands. She was scared, desperate. "You the owner?" she asked, her voice steadier than he expected. Rafe nodded, lowering the rifle slightly. "This is my land. You trespassing." The woman swallowed hard. "We didn't mean to. We just needed shelter." The child, a little girl, no older than Millie, peeked out from behind her mother. Her cheeks were smudged with dirt, her shoes barely holding together. Rafe's chest tightened. He'd seen that look before, the hollow-eyed weariness of someone who'd been running too long. "Where's your husband?" he asked, though the answer was plain in the way the woman flinched. "Gone," she said softly. "And our home with him." The wind whistled through the cracks in the barn walls. The little girl shivered. Rafe exhaled, his breath a white cloud in the cold air. He thought of Millie, safe and warm inside the house, her laughter like sunlight even on the darkest days. He thought of the empty chair at the table, the silence that had stretched too long. "You got a name?" he asked at last. The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Elara. And this is Posey." Rafe studied them a moment longer. Then he jerked his head toward the house. "Come on inside. Can't have you freezin' to death in my barn." Elara's eyes widened. "You'd let us stay?" "Tonight," he said gruffly. "We'll figure the rest tomorrow." Posey tugged her mother's sleeve, whispering something Rafe couldn't hear. Elara smoothed her daughter's hair, her fingers trembling. Then she looked back at Rafe, something like hope flickering in her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. Rafe just nodded and turned toward the house, the weight of two more souls settling onto his shoulders. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't know if this was a mistake. But as he led them through the cold and the dark, one thought circled in his mind like a stubborn horse refusing the bit. "Your daughter needs a home. Mine wants a mother." Maybe, just maybe, this was the answer for them all. The morning sun painted the kitchen in pale gold as Rafe stirred his coffee, the steam curling into the quiet air. Across the table, Elara sat stiffly, her hands wrapped around her own untouched cup. The night before had passed in uneasy silence. Posey tucked into Millie's bed, the two girls whispering like old friends before sleep claimed them, while the adults lingered in the parlor, strangers bound by circumstance. Now, daylight made the arrangement feel all the more fragile. A knock at the door shattered the stillness. Rafe's jaw tightened. He knew that impatient rap Mrs. Hodge, the town's self-appointed keeper of morals, who somehow always knew when something on his ranch didn't meet her approval. He opened the door to her pinched face, her sharp eyes darting past him to where Elara sat. "Well," Mrs. Hodge said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I heard you had company." Rafe blocked her view with his broad frame. "Morning, ma'am. Something I can help you with?" She sniffed. "The ladies' auxiliary is collecting quilts for the church bazaar. But it seems you've got more pressing matters to tend to. Her gaze flicked pointedly toward Elara again. A unmarried woman under your roof, Rafe Carter. What would your dear departed wife think? Behind him, a chair scraped against the floor as Elara stood. He didn't need to look to know her face would be pale, her hands clenched. She'd heard the venom in the words unmarried. Mrs. Hodge pressed on, relentless. And that child of hers, no father, no proper home. People will talk. The sheriff might even take an interest. Rafe's blood ran cold. He'd seen it happen before, children declared uncared for and hauled off to the county orphanage, all because some busybody decided their mother wasn't fit. His grip on the doorframe turned white-knuckled. "I'll bring a quilt by next week," he said flatly, and shut the door in her startled face. Silence hung heavy in the kitchen. Elara's breath came quick and shallow, her fingers pressed to her lips. "She's right," she whispered. "We can't stay like this." Rafe turned to face her, the weight of the unspoken pressing down on them both. He thought of Millie's laughter that morning, how she'd clung to Elara's skirts like she'd known her forever. Thought of Posey's shy smile when he'd handed her a biscuit with extra honey. Then he said the words that would change everything. "Marry me?" Elara's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What?" "It don't have to be real," he said gruffly. "Just papers. A name for you and Posey, a roof over your heads. No one can take her from you then." Elara's throat worked. "And what do you get out of it?" He glanced toward the stairs, where the girls' giggles drifted down like birdsong. "Millie needs a mother. You're good with her. And I—" He hesitated, the admission sticking in his throat. "I ain't been enough for her since her mama passed." Elara turned away, her shoulders tense. "I can't promise you love, Rafe. My heart's broken. Maybe for good." "Didn't ask for it," he said, though the words stung more than he expected. "Just your word you'll stay. For the girls." Outside, the wind rattled the eaves, a reminder of the cold world waiting for her, for Posey. Elara closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were resigned. "All right," she said softly. "For the girls." The next day, they stood before the circuit judge in town, the girls fidgeting in their best dresses, Rafe's hands clenched at his sides. It was a quiet affair, no flowers or feasting, just a few mumbled vows and a signature on a page. As they stepped outside, Mrs. Hodge watched from across the street, her lips pursed. But for once, she had nothing to say. Back at the ranch, Millie twirled in the yard, chanting, "I have a mama now. A real mama." Posey trailed after her, quieter but smiling. Rafe glanced at Elara, standing stiffly beside him, her wedding ring glinting in the sun. A stranger, yet now his wife. "Welcome home," he said, and hoped someday she'd believe it. The first light of dawn crept through the kitchen window as Elara stared at the cast-iron stove, its blackened surface staring back like an unblinking eye. She had cooked over open flames before, had made do with meager rations on the road, but this beast of iron and coals was a different creature entirely. The bacon hissed angrily when she laid it in the pan, spitting grease onto her wrist. She bit back a cry, shaking her hand as the scent of burning filled the air. Behind her, Millie's bare feet pattered across the wooden floor, the child's morning energy bubbling over before the sun had properly risen. "Are you making breakfast?" Millie asked, peering up at her with wide, trusting eyes that made Elara's chest ache. "Trying to," Elara admitted, flipping the charred strips with a wince. Millie giggled. "Papa always burns the first batch too." The words should have comforted her, but they only tightened the knot in her stomach. She wasn't supposed to be like Rafe, stumbling through this. She was supposed to be the mother Millie needed, the competent woman who could step into a home and make it run smoothly. Yet here she stood, failing at the most basic task. The back door creaked open, letting in a rush of cold air and the scent of hay. Rafe paused on the threshold, his gaze flickering from the smoking pan to Elara's flour-dusted apron. For a terrible moment, she braced for criticism, for that quiet disappointment men so often wore when women didn't meet their unspoken expectations. Instead, he crossed to the sink, rolling up his sleeves. "Bacon's tricky," he said, taking the fork from her hand. Needs a slower fire. He didn't push her aside, just adjusted the damper and nudged the pan to a cooler spot, his movements easy and practiced. Elara watched, memorizing the way he tested the heat with a flick of water, how he turned the strips before they crisped too much. It was the first real kindness he'd shown her since the wedding, not tolerance, not resigned acceptance, but actual help. Millie tugged at her skirt. Can Posey and I collect eggs? Elara hesitated. The henhouse seemed a world away from the safety of the kitchen. Stay where I can see you, she said at last, and the girl beamed, darting off to rouse her new sister. Silence settled between the adults, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Rafe spoke, without looking up. You don't have to do everything right off. The words struck deeper than he could know. Elara busied herself with the biscuit dough, kneading harder than necessary. I want to pull my weight. You are. He flipped the bacon onto a plate. Millie's happier than I've seen her in years. The admission hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. Elara's hands stilled in the dough. She thought of Millie's easy hugs, how the child had taken to calling her Mama, without a second thought, as if the title had been waiting for her all along. Thought of Posey, who still woke crying from nightmares but now had a sister to climb into bed with her. A shriek from outside shattered the moment. Elara was at the window in an instant, her heart in her throat only to see Millie chasing a squawking hen, Posey laughing behind her with an egg clutched carefully in each hand. The tension bled from her shoulders. Rafe handed her a cup of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. They'll be all right, he said, and for the first time, it sounded like a promise meant for both of them. That night, as a summer storm rattled the windows, two small figures appeared in the bedroom doorway, their nightgowns fluttering like moth wings. Can we sleep here? Millie asked, her voice quavering with each thunderclap. Elara opened the covers without hesitation. The girls scrambled in, Posey burrowing against her side, Millie sprawled across the foot of the bed. When lightning flashed, illuminating Rafe's silhouette in the doorway, Elara expected him to carry Millie back to her own room. Instead, he dragged a chair to the bedside and sat, his presence a silent vigil against the storm. Between the rolls of thunder, Millie's sleepy voice piped up. Tell us a story, Papa. Rafe hesitated, then began a halting tale about a coyote who thought he was a sheepdog. The girls giggled at his terrible impressions, their fear forgotten. Elara found herself smiling too, caught off guard by the warmth in his voice when he wasn't guarding it behind gruffness. Later, when the storm had passed and the children's breaths had evened into sleep, Rafe reached to gather Millie into his arms. Elara stopped him with a touch. Leave them, she whispered. They're fine where they are. For a heartbeat. She thought he might argue. Then he nodded, his hand lingering near hers on the blanket before he drew away. In the dark, with the rain gentling to a whisper against the roof, the house felt less like a temporary shelter and more like something that could, in time, become a home. The scent of apple blossoms drifted through the open kitchen window as Elara peeled potatoes, the rhythmic scrape of her knife against the bowl keeping time with the girls' laughter in the yard. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, 3 weeks of tentative routines and fragile understandings. She no longer burned the bacon. Rafe no longer hovered when she needed bread. Small victories, but they mattered. A horse's sharp whinny broke the peaceful rhythm. Elara glanced up to see a rider approaching the house, a stranger in a tailored coat that marked him as a town man, his hat shading a face too smooth for ranch life. Something cold slithered down her spine even before he dismounted, before his polished boots hit the dirt with deliberate weight. Afternoon, ma'am, he called, tipping his hat with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Looking for Rafe Carter. The knife slipped in Elara's grip, nicking her thumb. She pressed the wound to her apron, the sting anchoring her. He's mending fences west of the creek. The stranger's gaze lingered on her wedding band, then flicked to the girls playing by the well. You must be the new Mrs. Carter. His voice dripped honey over something rotten. I'm Silas Vick, an old acquaintance of your first husband. The name hit like a bucket of ice water. Elara's vision tunneled. She knew that voice, knew the way it could wrap lies in silk, how it had whispered poison in her late husband's ear until the man she loved doubted his own shadow. Posy chose that moment to barrel into her skirts, her hands sticky with berry juice. Mama, Millie says we can, she froze, sensing the tension, her small face tilting up to study the stranger. Vic's expression softened into something grotesquely paternal. Well now. You must be Posy. My, how you've grown. The child recoiled, her tiny fingers digging into Elara's legs. That reaction told Elara everything. Posy remembered this man, remembered the days after her father's death when Vic had come round, his offers of help laced with threats. Elara pried Posy's hands free and nudged her toward the house. Go help Millie finish those berries, darling. The moment the door clicked shut, Vic's mask slipped. Didn't think to find you here, all cozy on another man's ranch. Quite the step up from begging for work at the lumber camp. Elara's pulse roared in her ears. What do you want? Just paying my respects. He leaned against the porch post, examining the ranch with greedy eyes. Though I wonder what your new husband would say if he knew how your last marriage ended. The debts, the rumors. The potato knife trembled in Elara's hand. Get off this land. Vic chuckled, straightening his cuffs. Oh, I'll go. But Rafe Carter and I will be having us a talk. He tipped his hat again and sauntered toward his horse, leaving boot prints in her carefully swept yard. Elara stood frozen, the peeled potatoes browning in the sun, her mind racing. She should have known this peace couldn't last. Happiness had always been a currency she wasn't allowed to keep. When Rafe returned at dusk, dirt streaking his shirt and weariness in his steps, Elara met him at the barn with fresh bandages. He'd torn his palm on barbed wire. She could see the blood even in the fading light. Vic came by, she said, handing him the cloth. Rafe paused mid-reach. Who? The man from town. He said. The railroad fellow. Rafe wrapped his hand with rough efficiency. Met him at the mercantile last week. Wants to buy the north pasture. Elara's breath caught. You can't sell to him. Why not? Rafe frowned at her vehemence. He's offering good money. The words tangled in her throat. How to explain that selling land to Vic would be inviting a wolf into the henhouse? That the man would use any foothold to sink his teeth into their lives? He's not what he seems, she managed. Rafe's expression closed like a shuttered window. I know how to judge a man's character, Elara. The dismissal stung. She turned away, but not fast enough to miss the way his eyes dropped to her hands, to the fresh cut on her thumb, to the wedding band that suddenly felt like a shackle. That night, she lay rigid in bed, listening to Rafe's even breathing, to the creak of the house settling. Somewhere beyond the walls, the wind carried the scent of rain, of change. And when the first drops hit the roof, they sounded like warning drums. The pre-dawn chill clung to the kitchen as Elara kneaded dough with unnecessary force, her knuckles whitening with each push and fold. 3 days had passed since Vic's visit, 3 days of Rafe's stony silence, of meals eaten in taut quiet while the girls exchanged confused glances. The loaf taking shape beneath her hands would be tough from overworking, but she couldn't stop. The motion kept her from imagining Vic's voice dripping poison in Rafe's ear, from picturing the moment her fragile new life would crumble like dried clay. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned to find Posy standing in her nightgown, clutching the rag doll Millie had gifted her, her eyes too old for a child's face. You're up early, Elara said, wiping flour-streaked hands on her apron. Posy shuffled closer, pressing her face into Elara's skirt. I had the bad dream again. The nightmare always the same. A man's raised voice, a slammed door, her father's empty chair. Elara crouched to meet her daughter's eyes. Was it about Mr. Vic? A tiny nod. Posy's whisper was barely audible. He made Papa sad. Then Papa went away and didn't come back. Elara's throat tightened. She gathered Posy close, breathing in the child's sleepy scent, remembering how her husband had shrunk under Vic's manipulations, how the light had left his eyes long before the fever took him. The dough sat forgotten as she carried Posy to the porch rocker, wrapping them both in a quilt. Beyond the yard, the first hints of sunrise painted the prairie in pinks and golds. Rafe emerged from the barn, his shoulders dusted with hay, his movements stiff with exhaustion. He'd been sleeping there since their argument, a fact Millie had tearfully announced yesterday at supper. Posey tensed in Elara's arms as he approached. To her surprise, Rafe paused at the bottom step, removing his hat in an uncharacteristic gesture of deference. "Morning," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Elara braced for more coldness, but Posey surprised them both. "Mr. Rafe?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "That bad man is lying to you." Rafe's eyebrows lifted. He crouched to Posey's eye level, his calloused hands resting on his knees. "How do you know he's bad, little one?" Posey's fingers twisted in the quilt. "He came to our house after Papa died.
Said mean things.
Made Mama cry." Her lower lip trembled. "He said we had to leave 'cause Papa owed money, but Mama says that wasn't true." The confession hung in the air like gun smoke. Rafe's gaze flicked to Elara, searching for confirmation. She met his eyes steadily, letting him see the truth she'd been too proud to voice, that Vic preyed on the vulnerable, that her first husband had been another casualty in his quiet war of attrition. Rafe exhaled through his nose, the sound weary and resigned. He reached out slowly, giving Posey time to retreat, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. "Thank you for telling me." The simple acceptance shattered something in Elara. Tears pricked her eyes as Rafe straightened, his posture less rigid than it had been in days. "I'll be in the north pasture," he said quietly, and strode toward the barn. The day unfolded with uneasy normalcy, chores completed, meals prepared, the girls whispering together over their readers. But when evening fell, Rafe didn't disappear to the barn. He lingered at the supper table, asking Millie about her lessons, passing the salt when Elara's fingers brushed it. Small gestures, but they carried weight. After the girls were abed, Elara found him on the porch, whittling a block of wood into what might become a toy horse. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure of her welcome. "Sit," he said without looking up. The bench creaked under her weight. Crickets sang in the grass, their rhythmic chirping filling the silence. "I rode into town today," Rafe said at last. "Asked around about Vic." The knife stilled in his hand. "Turns out he's got a habit of buying up land from widows and orphans. Always legal-like, but it's theft all the same," Elara finished softly. Rafe nodded, his jaw working. "I owe you an apology. Should have listened sooner." The admission cost him. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes. Elara studied her hands, the wedding band that had felt like a lie, but now seemed different. "I should have told you everything from the start." Moonlight silvered the yard, casting long shadows. Rafe set aside his whittling and reached into his pocket. When he opened his palm, a late-season prairie flower rested there, its purple petals slightly crushed. "Found this by the creek," he muttered. "Thought you might." The words trailed off, but the offering spoke for itself. Elara took the flower with careful fingers, its stem still damp with evening dew. Their hands brushed, and this time, neither pulled away. "Maybe we can be more than just convenient," Rafe said, so quiet the words might have been the wind. In the house behind them, childish laughter floated through an open window, Millie's giggle, Posey's answering squeal. Elara let her shoulder press against Rafe's, just slightly, just enough. "Maybe we already are," she whispered back. The Harvest Festival banners flapped gaily in the autumn breeze as the wagon rolled into town, their vibrant reds and golds standing stark against the cloudless blue sky. Elara smoothed her skirts for the 10th time, the unfamiliar fabric of her new dress whispering against her legs. Beside her, Posey clutched the doll Millie had insisted she bring, her small face alight with wonder at the bustling square. The child had never seen so many people in one place, never been part of something that felt like celebration rather than survival. Rafe guided the team to a hitching post, his shoulders stiff beneath his good shirt. Elara knew this was as uncomfortable for him as it was for her being on display before the whole town, their marriage no longer just a legal arrangement, but something tender and new. She caught his eye as he helped her down, and the quick, private smile he offered sent warmth flooding through her chest. Millie immediately grabbed Posey's hand. "Come on. The pie judging's about to start." The girls darted off toward the long tables groaning with baked goods, leaving Rafe and Elara standing awkwardly by the wagon. Around them, townsfolk cast curious glances their way, some friendly, others less so. Mrs. Hodges' voice carried from a nearby cluster of women. "Well, I suppose even a marriage of convenience can look presentable if you starch the collars enough." Elara's cheeks burned, but before she could react, Rafe's calloused fingers found hers, twining together with quiet determination. The gesture silenced the whispers better than any retort. "Let's get some cider," he murmured, leading her toward the refreshment stand. The afternoon unfolded in a blur of laughter and music, Millie winning third prize for her apple tart, Posey shyly joining in the children's games, Rafe surprising everyone, including himself, by placing second in the wood-chopping contest. As the golden light of evening gilded the square, a fiddler struck up a reel, and couples began forming for the dancing. Elara hung back near the punch bowl, content to watch. She'd never learned proper dancing. Her first husband had been more likely to criticize her steps than guide her through them. But then Rafe was there, his hand extended, his ears pink with something other than the autumn chill. "May I?" The question was so formal, so unlike his usual gruffness that Elara nearly laughed. Instead, she placed her hand in his and let him lead her to the makeshift dance floor. Around them, eyebrows raised. A rancher's wife whispered behind her fan. But as Rafe's arms settled around Elara's waist, as they found their rhythm in the simple steps, the stares faded away. There was only the press of his palm against hers, the way his breath caught when she smiled up at him, the unspoken promise humming between them. The music swelled, and Rafe spun her gently, his lips brushing her ear. "You're beautiful," he murmured, the words barely audible over the fiddle. Elara's heart stuttered. No one had called her beautiful in years, not since before the shadows had swallowed her first marriage whole. She opened her mouth to respond, but a commotion at the edge of the square cut her off. Silas Vick stood near the mercantile, his polished boots gleaming, his expression dark as he watched them. A hush fell over the nearest dancers as he strode forward, his voice carrying. "Quite the performance, Mrs. Carter. Though I wonder what tales you'd spin if your new husband knew about the lien on your first husband's property." The music died abruptly. Elara's stomach dropped as every eye turned their way. She felt Rafe tense beside her, saw Millie's confused face in the crowd. But then something miraculous happened. Old Mr. Peterson, the mercantile owner, stepped forward. "That's enough, Vic. We all know how you operate." Mrs. Hendricks from the post office nodded. "Trying to shame a good woman won't make your railroad money any cleaner." Even Mrs. Hodge sniffed. "Really, Mr. Vic, must you make a scene at our festival?" Vic's face purpled with outrage, but the tide had turned. The fiddler struck up again, louder this time, and the crowd deliberately turned their backs on him. Rafe's hand found Elara's waist again, pulling her close. "You all right?" She nodded, breathless with relief, and something else, something like belonging. As they resumed dancing, as the girls cheered from the sidelines, Elara realized with sudden clarity that this was her life now.
Her town.
Her family. Later, as fireworks painted the sky in bursts of color, Posey asleep against Rafe's shoulder and Millie drowsing in Elara's lap, she let her head rest against his arm. "Home?" he asked softly as the last sparks faded. Elara looked at their tangled little family, at the man who'd chosen to believe in her, at the children who'd woven their lives together without hesitation, and smiled. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." The first snowflakes of winter drifted past the farmhouse windows as Elara fastened the clasp on her new locket, the metal warm against her skin from being held so long in Rafe's palm. Outside, the girls' laughter rang through the crisp air as they chased each other through the powdery snow, their boot prints weaving wild patterns across the pristine yard. The locket opened with a quiet click inside, for faces smiled back at her. Rafe looking uncharacteristically relaxed, Millie mid-giggle, Posey with her solemn eyes finally bright, and Elara herself, her expression softer than she remembered it ever being before. She turned to find Rafe watching her from the bedroom doorway, his work-roughened fingers twisting the brim of his hat. The man who'd faced down wolves and blizzards without flinching suddenly looked uncertain, vulnerable. "Do you like it?" he asked, his voice gruff with emotion he still hadn't learned to voice. Elara crossed to him, the locket resting light as a promise against her collarbone. It's perfect. Rafe exhaled, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. Got something else for you. From his pocket, he produced a sprig of evergreen tied with red thread, the same simple decoration they'd hung on the cabin's eaves their first Christmas together, back when this had all been pretend. For our real tree, he murmured. The significance wasn't lost on her. That first holiday, they'd been strangers playing house. Now, when Millie called her mama, it didn't make her flinch with guilt. Now Posey slept through the night without nightmares. Now Rafe's arms around her at night weren't just for warmth, but because they'd both learned how badly they needed the anchor of each other's touch. Downstairs, the girls burst through the front door in a flurry of snow and excitement. Papa. Mama. Millie's voice carried up the stairs. We built a snow family. Come see. Rafe's callous thumb brushed Elara's cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You're not just Millie's mother now, he whispered. You're my heart. The kiss that followed was slow and sweet, a seal on promises they'd spent months learning to make. When they pulled apart, Elara pressed the evergreen to her lips before tucking it safely into the locket with their pictures. A new tradition to honor how far they'd come. Outside, their daughters waited beside four carefully crafted snow figures, too large, too small, with stick arms entwined. As Elara took her place beside Rafe on the porch, as Posey shyly reached for her hand and Millie beamed up at them both, the last of winter's light gilded their little family in gold. The road here had been long paved with grief and second chances, with misunderstandings and hard-won trust. But as Rafe's fingers laced through hers, as the girls began lobbying for hot cocoa, Elara knew with quiet certainty, this was no longer just shelter. No longer just convenience. This was home. Did this story of love forged through hardship warm your heart? There are countless other tales waiting to be told of resilient souls finding their way home, of unlikely love blooming in difficult places, of families created not by blood, but by choice. Subscribe to never miss these moving journeys where broken pieces are mended with patience and care, where simple acts of kindness rewrite destinies, where every ending is just the beginning of a richer, deeper story. Your next unforgettable read is only a subscription away. Join our community of readers who believe in second chances and the transformative power of love. Click subscribe now because everyone deserves to discover stories that stay with them long after the final page. Turn the page. Open your heart. Begin again. Subscribe for more emotional, uplifting tales that remind us all of love's enduring light.